Hello.
Morning.
Morning.
They're just finishing up the connection meeting.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's great. Well, I'll start with an update here on my own. So this week we had the DevoWorm meeting, and that was where we talked about epithelial sheets. First of all, we talked about cell-cell junctions. We talked about how you can model junctions and all the components of that in a sheet, and then we talked about thinking of epithelial sheets as a complex adaptive system. That is, you have these forces that arise from each cell that keep the sheet stable, but then you have these larger scale structures of positional information and tissue integrity, and that's what we talked about in the first paper, was how that tissue integrity is maintained, and that's what kind of constrains things from the top down. So you have these bottom-up forces from each cell. It could be molecular mechanisms. They could be actions of the cell itself, and then you have things from that higher level of organization constraining function. So that was nice. You can go see that on the YouTube channel. And we still have, I guess, some postmortem from the Active Inference Symposium. We didn't do anything this week with it, but that's still kind of to digest and to think about. Yeah, so we had a couple things sort of following up from the Active Inference Symposium, and then something that was put in the Slack. So this is the first thing I want to talk about. So this is active inference related. This is Alexander Shaw, who I don't think was at the symposium, but does a lot of stuff that we've talked about with active inference and sort of this computational psychiatry approach.
I can talk about some other papers that he's been publishing just like this month. Relevant to the what is intelligence reading group that we just did this week too. Okay. Anyway, sorry to keep going.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. So this is a Neuro-Inspired computational framework for AGI, predictive coding, active inference, and free energy minimization. So this is a recent preprint. The abstract. This paper proposes that foundational principles from theoretical neuroscience / predictive coding, the free energy principle, and variational inference offer a biologically grounded framework for artificial general intelligence. These approaches characterize the brain as a hierarchical inference system that continuously updates beliefs and selects actions to minimize uncertainty and surprise. In contrast to conventional AI systems, which typically rely on static architectures and offline training, biological agents engage in active generative inference within dynamic, uncertain environments. We argue that it is the inference-based architecture, not just its behavioral outputs, that underpins the adaptability, generalization, and resilience of natural intelligence. So it's this ability to do inference rather than just having this standard behavioral output that they kind of isolate as the key to this. We outlined a neuro-inspired computational framework built on hierarchical generative models, scalable variational inference, like variational Laplace, and active inference. Finally, we contrast this approach with dominant deep learning paradigms and discuss its implications for building interpretable, adaptive, and autonomous machine intelligence. So So they basically go over predictive coding and the free energy principle. These theories propose that perception, action, and learning arise from the hierarchical minimization of prediction error via approximate Bayesian inference. In this view, the brain is a generative model. It continuously predicts sensory inputs, updates internal beliefs in response to mismatches, and selects actions that minimize expected future surprise. So we have prediction, response to mismatches, and minimizing surprise. Those are like the three basic components of active inference. And so this forms a predictive loop. So this is a feedback loop that supports both epistemic behavior, reducing uncertainty through exploration, and instrumental behavior, pursuing preferred outcomes, achieved by internally simulating possible futures and evaluating them according to expected free energy. The underlying dynamics are governed by a variational principle. And this is also important in active inference. And when they say variational, they mean that the brain minimizes a quantity called variational free energy, abound on model evidence, providing unified explanation for learning, adaptation, and action selection under uncertainty. So variational free energy is defined by this term here, which is where the QZ is the approximate posterior, PZ given X is the true posterior, and then PX is the model evidence. So you have basically the posterior given model evidence, and then the approximate posterior given the true posterior given model evidence. And then you subtract log model evidence, and then you have your KL divergence, and that's your function that you're basically minimizing, which is your variational free energy. Minimizing this bound approximates Bayesian inference in a tractable way. So this is the bound that we're talking about. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence has made rapid progress in areas such as transformer-based large language models, diffusion-based generative models, and reinforcement learning agents. So these are all kind of relevant things. Interestingly, in the open source, the presentation I gave on open source sustainability, I focused a lot on the reinforcement learning models that we've been doing, and kind of relating that to active inference and some of the things. And we've done some active inference in the past, but there's some interesting sort of mathematical relationships in the models that we've been using with active inference. And so that's something I think we should follow up on, especially given kind of what we're trying to do in terms of solve a collective behavioral problem and how to best approach that. This also is very interesting in terms of the post-transformer model landscape that we were talking about for the last 2 weeks, where we're thinking about how to move beyond transformers or how to improve upon transformers as that step in a large language model or some other way to kind of overcome the limitations of those models. So this is where I think that's what they're maybe kind of posing for active inference, that it's sort of better than a transformer-based approach, but that's something I guess that they're going to get into later in the paper. So then they kind of point out the limitations of modern models that are currently used. So that's like transformer-based models, also diffusion models and reinforcement learning agents. These systems often struggle to generalize beyond their training distribution, adapt online, or robustly handle uncertainty. And so one of the problems, of course, is that they typically lack explicit generative models of the environment and rely on static architectures trained via supervised or reinforcement learning. So reinforcement learning, say for example, is good for learning kind of immediate sorts of rewards and policies, but it's not good at like that sort of world model approach where you need to model the world so you don't have to have been trained on everything to get the gist of the context. So This is kind of a long-standing question in cognitive science, which is, how do we put things into a framework? How do you have a general idea of where things fit into the world, despite maybe not having experience with a specific thing? Where do you fit that into the world? We can do that pretty easily as sort of, when we're in a context, we have this sort of intuitive sense of where something goes, and that's not something you see in machine intelligence. So this is kind of an interesting thing. It's not something you can get with diffusion models. It's not something you can get reinforcement models, and not transformer models. So yeah, and then we talked actually, in our paper on the Evergood regulator theorem, we talked about diffusion-based models and sort of how you can maybe use the Evergood regulator as a means to get to a world model based on these kind of problems where you have like a diffusion-based approach, and then you can generalize from that. So that's something that is maybe an interesting area. But what they're arguing here is that you need to have an explicit generative model, and of course they're going to put in they're going to plug in basically variational free energy as that generative model. This paper explores the emerging hypothesis that the computational principles underlying brain function, predictive coding, dynamical systems modeling, and active inference may provide a biologically grounded blueprint for constructing general-purpose agents. We argue that such agents should not merely reproduce intelligent behavior, but embody the same self-organizing inference-based principles that underlie human cognition. To develop this argument, we proceed as follows. First, we examine the brain as an inference engine, showing how hierarchical predictive coding and active inference give rise to perception, action, and learning. Next, we contrast this with prevailing AI paradigms, particularly transformer and diffusion-based models, highlighting their strengths and limitations. We then present the free energy principle and variational Laplace, which is going to be a variation on variational free energy, as scalable engines for neuro-inspired AI. And then they propose a roadmap for AGI based on this way of doing things. So there's this model of general intelligence, and this is where we view perception, cognition, and action as the outcomes of approximate Bayesian inference embedded in a dynamical system. And so this allows us to have a model where we are able to approximate the world, anticipate it, and select actions that reduce uncertainty. Okay. So we want to have this hierarchical generative model. There's this, they kind of argue the brain is a hierarchical architecture that can, basically have each level generate predictions about the activity of the level below. Sensory signals are explained away by these top-down predictions, and only residual errors are propagated upward. So they approach this as a message-passing architecture, which supports Bayesian inference over latent variable z, given sensory observations x, under a joint generative model here. And this is just this statement here. Because exact Bayesian inference is intractable in realistic settings, the brain is assumed to represent a variational posterior, QZ, that approximates the true posterior, PZ, given x. So this is where you have this posterior that approximates the true posterior, and that's your variational form. Inference then proceeds by minimizing a variational free energy functional, which is here. This is basically what we're looking at with your variational free energy. And then minimizing free energy ensures that internal beliefs are both accurate and parsimonious, which remains close to prior expectations. This provides a trade-off between flexibility and generalization, which is essential for adaptive intelligence. Or are you going to say something, Morgan? Or?
I really do like Shaw's work, and yeah, glad we're covering it. This is still very broad strokes, though, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, we'll get a little bit into maybe like how they're applying it more generally, but it's very much I think a position piece. They're not really saying this is an example of it in a robot or something. It's just kind of like this is an alternative to.
I mean, he's definitely in the active inference camp.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's standard active inference stuff.
Like active inference has something to contribute to AGI.
Yeah.
And I like his work too. I mean, he publishes, or I shouldn't say publishes. He posts a lot of just tutorial links and like computational examples.
Yeah.
So yeah, and
yeah. Okay, this is an example of predictive coding and visual perception. So predictive coding is sort of related to active inference in that we have this feedback loop and we're sort of estimating things and minimizing error. So this is an example of predictive coding. Consider a simple visual scene in which a person views a cup on a table. Higher level visual areas, or inferotemporal cortex, which is the anatomical localization, generate abstract predictions such as object with a handle or familiar graspable shape. These predictions are sent down the hierarchy, shaping expectations for the patterns of activity in lower level areas. So these would be like orientation edges in V1. So you have this network where there's processing in the visual system. The early parts of the visual system are represented by V1, and then later parts of the visual system are represented by inferotemporal cortex. So V1 is lower in this case, and inferotemporal is higher. And so they have this relationship where one is kind of sending information forward, and then the other is kind of giving this information back as feedback. If the incoming sensory input matches these expectations, prediction error remains low. So if the different processing in different parts of the visual stream or visual network are basically similar, there are no surprises like when you refine some of the shapes, that there's this thing that pops out, then prediction error remains low. However, if the object is partially occluded or appears unusual, say if it's a broken cup or an unexpected angle prediction, so it's like if the visual system gets sort of the gist of what it is, but then it has some exception to it that is a problem because it might not be a cup if it's a broken cup, or it could be a cup. The visual system has to sort of and then there are other parts of the brain that participate in this. Maybe that's a critical aspect of this. Different types of other information that you can use. But in general, as you resolve the image, the main, the overall image, you get these exceptions that then can need to be resolved, basically. So this is where we get these errors that arise maybe in early visual areas and are sent upward. These errors are crucial. They signal a mismatch and prompt higher level areas to update their beliefs until the model settles on the most likely explanation, which is damaged cup. So you have lower level systems that identify the shape of a cup, and then it's most likely a cup. And then you get these exceptions that give it, provide different subsets of information. So you have these refined categories like damaged cup, and that's most likely. So it isn't necessarily always going to be damaged cup. It might look like a damaged cup, but it might actually be something else, which is maybe one of the problems here. Is it's just this approach is just simply assuming that the visual system is making this classification on its own, which, this is something, of course, that may require other information. That's sort of, they talk about a priori and they talk about posterior predictions and things like that. But that of course requires, some sort of categorization. And so that's going to involve higher levels of the brain, maybe early on if we're doing this sort of category assessment, even in something like V1. In this way, perception operates not as passive registration, but as the brain's best guess about the hidden cause of ambiguous, noisy input, allowing for rapid adaptation to new or unexpected situations. So this is, kind of reminiscent of the ambiguous figures paradigm, right? So in ambiguous figures, you have some sort of abstract shape or some shape that you can't identify right away. And, if you look at it in certain ways, it looks like maybe a duck or a pair of rabbit ears, and your visual system has to resolve that. That's, kind of just the orientation of things and how that gets interpreted and all that. So they're arguing that, you start off with these very ambiguous shapes or these ambiguous objects, and they get resolved as the visual system gains more information. But critically, the visual system has to make predictions about what that thing is, and then it goes down this path of minimizing that error. So it could be the wrong thing, it could be the wrong category, but as long as the error is minimized, it's going in that direction and it resolves it. So the idea isn't that it necessarily gets things correct. The idea is it's minimizing error, which is sort of this free energy model, minimizing energy. And then you have, I don't know, I guess it's supposed to be right. Always correct. I don't know what the error rates would be, but, just keep that in mind. So the idea is that this is sort of the way that this works. And of course, this is how the visual system processes information, right? It starts with very simple patterns like stripes and blobs, and then it works its way up to details and kind of attaching semantic labels to them, which is, not talked about here so much. It's just kind of minimizing things. Then they talk about active inference. Notably, predictive coding is not restricted to perception. In the framework of active inference, action selection is cast as an inferential process driven by the same imperative that governs perception, which is the minimization of expected free energy. In this view, agents do not passively infer the causes of their observations. They actively select policies that make future observations more predictable and less surprising. So again, the surprise is, if you think about this in terms of regularization or normalization, things should become more sort of towards the mean over time, more predictable. You should have less surprise. And, this is, again, where if you think about this in terms of a world model, things should always kind of fit into this world model. And, acquiring that sort of predictability is the job of like a Bayesian statement where we're using conditional probabilities, we're using a prior distribution, we're then taking the current observations, we're fitting it into a prior, and we're sort of normalizing all that. So ultimately nothing should be surprising, although that kind of, the Bayesian approach kind of assumes that we have perfect information, right? We have to have a prior that incorporates everything in the world. You can't have a prior that incorporates sort of, a very tight distribution around the mean, and then have a bunch of out of distribution observations, because those out of distribution observations won't be able to fit into that model necessarily. So the expected free energy, which is G pi under a policy pi, can be decomposed into epistemic and instrumental components, capturing both uncertainty reduction, which is exploration, and goal-directed behavior, which is exploitation. So they're putting this in sort of a reinforcement learning cast, as you might guess. One common formulation expresses this as in this term, which is, we've seen this term before, but now we're adding in this expected free energy. And so this form reflects the expected divergence. So this is like the we saw with the KL divergence, or the log probabilities expressed, or log likelihoods expressed as KL divergence, but now we're talking about free energy. This is the expected divergence between posterior and likelihood minimizing. It encourages the agent to seek actions that simultaneously reduce uncertainty about hidden states and achieve preferred outcomes. In effect, perception and action are unified under a single inferential scheme. The brain continually infers not only what is happening, but what it should do to bring about the desired and predictable state of affairs. So this is important because really what the point of this isn't to just classify things passively, but to provide an impetus for actions that will rectify the situation. So, if you see an ambiguous figure, if you're familiar with the paradigm, if I see like two things, if there are two options in my ambiguous perception, if I'm supposed to either see like a rabbit or a duck, and I'm talking to my person next to me, and I say, I think I see a rabbit. They say, I think I see a duck. And you're like, okay, well, let me look and see if it's a duck. And so you refocus your eyes. Now you see a duck because, you're expecting that based on the communication with your neighbor. So you're doing active things in the world to sort of make a certain outcome happen. You're using this information that you're getting from this model, and you're actually acting upon it. And maybe normalizing your behavior. Maybe you're just kind of, it's helping you sort of get to the thing that you're supposed to do, or get to things that make sense, or whatever. But there's an active component here that is not something you see in your transformer models or in your diffusion models or any of that. So their approach to a world model is almost sort of like, we have to have this action component to it. And I know we talked about how people are wanting to do action models and collecting data on action models. But there is this school of thought, of course, where you just have to have behavior do things. Like, it's not a data set that you need, it's experience in the world. The agent has to have experience. It has to just kind of roam around the world and collect enough sort of experience to do something. I actually hit upon this in the spatial intelligence talk. If you watch towards the end, where part of spatial cognition isn't really building a model of the world that's perfect. It's about exploring enough of the world so that it makes conditions ergodic, or that you can sort of have a representation of every possible thing in the world, or as many possible things as you can in the world, so that they just become part of this experience, and then this world model that is, it's sort of after the experience. So it's maybe you say, well, you could just collect data for that, but it's actually more than that, because the agent actually has to have experienced being in that space, or being in that situation. So it's worth thinking about. And then this is not a new idea, of course. People have talked about experience, and of course in embodiment we talk about experience and all of this, where you have to, it's not just about data points. It's about having that connection between using your body to do something and then having that information is sort of almost like a unique set of data points that you can then use to gain that knowledge or gain that model. So again, they cast this against reinforcement learning. So unlike traditional reinforcement learning, which relies on externally defined reward signals and policy optimization, active inference derives behavior from an internal generative model and an imperative to minimize variational free energy. So goals and preferences So goals and preferences are encoded as prior beliefs about preferred states, and behavior emerges from the drive to release these states while realizing these states while reducing uncertainty. This makes active inference naturally suited to continual adaptive control. So this is continual learning and this sort of thing in uncertain environments, offering a biologically grounded alternative to model-free or value-based methods. So this is where they decompose expected free energy. So the expected free energy G pi, which captures both uncertainty reduction, which is the epistemic value, and goal fulfillment, which is the instrumental value. And then the decomposition of this equation is where you have G pi, which equals two parts, the epistemic value, which is here, which has these conditional likelihoods under KL divergence and looking at that. And then that's additive with instrumental value, which is this log probability and this conditional Q. So this is basically where you have a preference, you want to reduce your uncertainty, so you want to make sure that your beliefs align with what's going on in the environment, and then those are the things you're acting upon. So it's almost like in reinforcement learning, we have a policy, and we try to find our preferred policy. So, it's kind of like, I wouldn't say mushing these together, but like it's basically like leaning on the idea of instrumental value and then just optimizing that instead of having this component of epistemic value where you have this uncertainty and you're just reducing that. So it's like, with epistemic value, if I believe something or if I have a set of beliefs, those are epistemic things. Like if I believe things about the world, like if I believe that if I go far enough along the surface of the earth, I fall off the edge instead of coming around on my original point because we're on a sphere instead of on a flat surface. And so I have to go out and test that. I have to go travel, and I can believe either thing, but my uncertainty is not eliminated until I actually experience that thing. I have to go out and test it. I have to go out and experience that travel, and then I know for sure, and that reduces my uncertainty about things. And you can do that with agents. If the agent sees the edge of a grid, does the agent know that the grid is toroidal, or that that's the edge of the grid and they need to not go to the edge because they might get trapped? This is just thinking about a grid where you have a two-dimensional grid where you have agents exploring. Let's see, we had a question from Jesse here. Yeah, so I'm thinking about how this relates to comments like affordance and computation, to what I just said about needing a body to get the data from the world in interactions, not just abstracted out of data points. Yeah, I think that's a good point. That is a fundamentally different thing, I guess. That's the whole argument of embodiment, right? Is that that experience in the body, I think it was like Adam Safran and colleagues who said it's like this, there's this filtering mechanism that happens with things, with using your body. If you have like something like proprioception or interoception, there's this filtering that happens that you only get from having that sensory experience. So you have a bunch of sensors that are collecting data, but that information is being put together in a way that is not just kind of like data points that you can explore or feed forward. Then that's a good point. Then the second comment, there's a very interesting discussion happening with Ilan at Ecolopto at FAU, where he's trying to sort of get at a large language model as a means of showing language, how language is sort of its own thing relative to the mind-body problem, mind-language problem. Yeah. So, I mean, that's, yeah. And then, of course, there is this role of language in like motor learning and in embodiment that we haven't really talked a lot about, but Jesse would like to speak. So go ahead, Jesse.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Just this. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a way to really get at what I wanted to say. I appreciate what you're doing. The LLM thing I mentioned not because I'm necessarily a proponent of the view, but more like I think it's a nice view in terms of identifying. I don't know if I believe it, but I see what Elon's getting at with his work there, sort of this. There's a structure of the language that is potentially disembodied, and like an internal logic to it, which is, I'm not trying to say separate, but like is its own thing, and like that's fine, and it's like, but again, I missed a little bit of things earlier today, but I'm seeing it as like a juxtaposition to the things that you require. I don't really like the words computation here, but like that which requires you to, through your and physical embodiment, get indication. It's like having markers, or like kind of like using printed bills, like that you're tracking the thing through it. Like by going through the medium interaction, you get a specific kind of information, and maybe a specific kind of uncertainty reduction. And the last point I wanted to make was like, what was very interesting, and just now and all this is like we've talked before about like riding a bicycle and ready at hand, and how like your mind, you can transfer your sense of self to like, okay, I'm now riding a bicycle, unless something makes me think about that. I will sort of be in it, and then okay, as soon as now I'm not the bicycle anymore. I have to repair it, stop, get out, repair the tire, whatever. That kind of discussion, which I'm very, very roughly referencing here in our previous phenomenological talk, right? And it's sort of like, I think, and I assume this maybe is a core of phenomenological discourse in general. But then I was like, okay, well, everything is a version. Everything you experience is sort of this version of riding the bicycle. It's always the body itself is like the first bicycle, but it doesn't mean you stop it or whatever, or that's less important. But it's like understanding that writing through a pen on a paper will have a specific impact, or like it's more than just the medium. It's the way that the information or the decision structures put through the interface of mediums or mediums plural, and it's like there's a signature by nature of it. I don't think I'm doing a great job of getting at what I'm at, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts or comments on that.
Yeah, this last thing you mentioned, that you perform an action, you have an impact. And we just talked about feedback, actually, in that respect. That's why you have this part of the model where you do something in the world and you see what it does, and then you do something else. Or you have this action part of like entropy minimization or surprisal minimization, which is where to minimize your uncertainty, you have to do things. Like you have to do experiments, or you have to explore the world or something. And so that's the action part. And a lot of like procedural learning is about experience. If I want to ride a bike, I can describe you how to ride a bike, but really to ride a bike, I need to ride the bike. And then I can do it automatically after that, because I encode those motions and things like that. And it's not something I can verbally tell you how to do. And then you just do it once and you're done. You have to have the experience. And so that's kind of where this is. So let's move on. Let's see. So this is kind of this decomposition of expected free energy. And so the interpretation of this equation, the G pi function, is that the first term, which is the epistemic value, encourages the agent to take actions that will be informative. Actions that reduce uncertainty about hidden states. So we have hidden states, we have observed states. We don't know all of our hidden states, and that's why we have to reduce our uncertainty. We have to resolve not just the observed states, but the hidden states as well. So, there may be states that we don't really understand what they are, but we know that they're kind of these things in our model that exist, but, we don't know exactly how to interpret. So, and then the second term pushes the agent towards outcomes that are consistent with prior preferences. desired or rewarding outcomes. Okay. And then so together these components drive exploration and exploitation without requiring an explicit reward signal. So this is again where, Vidhi knows this quite well, that in reinforcement learning we have these exploration and exploitation models. We also have them in other areas. We have these n-armed bandits. Actually, this came up in the active inference symposium, that people were using n-armed bandits to model exploration and exploitation. In this case, we're using this to not require an explicit reward signal in the model. So that's how they're doing this. So a lot of connections with reinforcement learning. The argument here is that it improves upon reinforcement learning by having this action state. And so then they talk about cognition as dynamical inference and state space. And so thinking about this as a dynamical system. And so then they talk about different neural dynamics. So you have these recurrent neural dynamics, and this is kind of how the brain is dealing with the production of these kinds of predictions and the production of integrating evidence and all that. So they say such recurrent neural dynamics, whether oscillatory, chaotic, or metastable, can be formalized as solutions of differential equations that govern the temporal evolution of beliefs. So these are like where we're describing our beliefs about the world as these differential equations that are going to become these dynamical trajectories, and then we want to understand how those evolve. So if we think about this in continuous time, we get this differential equation here where we have this gradient term, and then we're subtracting that from this function mu. And then, so we have like this first term here, and this is a triplet function, describes how beliefs will evolve over time based on prior expectations of natural dynamics. So I guess this is the mean behavior, the sum behavior, and then x, which is your sort of your current observation. And then this is over this gradient, which is this f, which I believe fits into, I don't see it. Anyways, and so the first term, this function part, this first part of this equation describes how beliefs would evolve over time based on prior expectations or natural dynamics, or how the brain expects things to change even without new sensory input. So say you know things, and then you stop observing the world, you put on a blindfold, you put your fingers in your ears, and then you kind of just think about the world, or you don't learn anything new. So this is where maybe you come up with a new solution, but not based on experience, just based on this kind of processing of what's there. The second term acts as a corrective force. This is this term here, adjusting beliefs to reduce prediction errors and improve the fit between the brain's model and the actual sensory input. So there's this gradient term where you have this correction. It's basically going down, it's minimizing along this gradient, and it's saying, okay, your beliefs need to be adjusted to get rid of these prediction errors because there's some things that don't make sense. So maybe we need to take our fingers out of our ears, take off our blindfold, and go explore the world, and that exploration will get us down the gradient to the minimal point, or the minimization point. So this is just thinking about these neural dynamics in a similar way, right? So we have this basic paradigm of how we have we're predicting from priors or producing a posterior. That posterior then is being minimized with respect to maybe experience or action. And so this is, again, so this is great. We're formalizing this mathematically, and then we're putting this in terms of like a set of neural mechanisms, and then we're looking at the dynamical systems output. So we can see that this is very easy to implement in like an agent, where you have to produce a behavior of some type, a coherent behavior. So that's what we have here. So the implication is profound. General intelligence and biological agents do not arise from learning specific input-output mappings or storing specific task solutions. Instead, it emerges from a capacity for continual, structured inference, dynamically estimating latent causes, updating beliefs over time, and selecting actions to minimize future uncertainty. So, from this perspective, we're not looking for a fixed algorithm, but a dynamical system for approximate inference in deep, uncertain, non-stationary environments. So basically, those environments where some people say you need a world model for. In the case of our transformer, a transformer would have problems with what we call out of distribution data. But this is, of course, maybe a solution to this because we don't need to worry about thinking about those things as outliers or as hard problems. It's just a problem of experience. And we put an agent in the world and just let it explore and kind of construct its own minimize solutions to things and find the optimal solution to it. So that's kind of what we're getting at here. So crucially, predictive coding and active inference provide more than a descriptive theory of neural computation. They offer a mechanistic template for constructing artificial systems that can reason, plan, and adapt in the same situated, embodied manner as human agents. And so this is kind of where they get into the limits of deep learning and predictive coding. So this is actually maybe relevant to our idea about post-transformer architectures. Thinking about how, we've had a lot of success with like large language models and convolutional neural networks. But deep learning, of course, is constrained in several respects. And they cite these here. They generalize poorly beyond their training distribution. They struggle to represent uncertainty in a principled way, and they lack the capacity for continual online adaptation. They're also reactive rather than proactive. They don't infer hidden causes, construct internal models of the environment, or select actions based on long-term expectations. So this is where they kind of talk about this, the core operating principles of these types of models and contrast them with the kind of model they're proposing here. So one of their points is that whereas conventional deep learning systems rely on static feed-forward mappings, optimized via backpropagation, predictive coding systems perform ongoing hierarchical inference over latent causes with uncertainty estimation and action selection embedded in the same inferential loop. Not just minimizing uncertainty, but we're selecting from actions and we're doing all that in one shot. So there have been some developments such as recurrent architectures, uncertainty-aware models, and online fine-tuning that have begun to chip away at this deficit of sort of the traditional deep learning approach and its drawbacks. Nevertheless, predictive coding and active inference provide a unified, biologically grounded framework in which inference, learning, and behavior emerge from a single underlying principle, which is the minimization of variational free energy. And so that's kind of what their argument is. Actually, this is a nice table. This is contrasting deep learning systems with predictive coding and active inference architectures. So this is kind of getting at the different aspects of these systems and then kind of how they do this differently. So the first aspect is core principle. In deep learning approaches, you have pattern recognition from data. In predictive coding, active inference, we have inferences over latent causes. So that's a difference in terms of how data is dealt with, which is important. And this doesn't necessarily mean you need experience. What this is arguing is that you have these latent sort of causes. You have these things that are possible, but we have to go out and explore and see if those things are actually the cause or not. So I could say, if I see the sunrise in the east in the morning, I could have a number of hypotheses for why that happens, but I can't know for sure until I test all of them. In the deep learning paradigm, I would only be able to verify things based on observed data. So I'd have to go out and have data about the curvature of the Earth, and then, like how the Earth turns on its axis and all of that. If I don't have that, then, those sorts of things aren't plausible. Whereas if I experience it, I can go out and do natural experiments, and I can experience my world and kind of come to a conclusion about that. And then, of course, that's, transferable. It's not just something that is, you have enough training data and you can triangulate that one thing, and then that doesn't generalize to anything else. Okay, then there's the architecture, which, of course, in deep learning is where we have feed-forward, static layers. And in predictive coding, we have hierarchical, recurrent, and dynamic architectures. So we have a wider range of architectures. Learning mechanisms. In deep learning, we have gradient descent on loss functions. We use things like cross entropy to look at the measure that. And then in predictive coding, we have minimization of variational free energy. So we still have a gradient, but the gradient is, not, it's basically like minimizing the available options until we get to like the only thing left. Whereas in deep learning, we're basically minimizing the training error. And, we don't necessarily know if our, what our training data represents. So all we know is that there's this loss, and we're trying to minimize it. Uncertainty handling in deep learning, it's often implicit or approximate, so we use something like dropout. In predictive coding, we use explicit. It's explicit via precision-weighted errors and variational posterior. So it's just fancier approach to uncertainty handling. And of course, this is again part of this conditional probability, right? We have a prior. The prior will represent, kind of like the same thing as sort of a training data set in deep learning. But then we refine that through observations, and then we have these posteriors, which represent beliefs about the world, and then we kind of refine all of that over time in a way that's not like optimizing. It's just kind of through experience. Adaptivity, in the case of deep learning, we have retraining or fine-tuning that's required. In active inference, we have online inference over fixed model structure, adaptation without retraining. Action selection in deep learning models is typically via separate reinforcement learning modules. So kind of another model has to deal with that. And then action selection is often done through reinforcement learning. In active inference, action selection is usually unified with perception via expected free energy. So the expected free energy term is the thing that does action selection. And it's integrated with that model in the sense that it's all taken into account kind of as part of that experience. World models. In deep learning, we have discriminative input to output mappings. In active inference, we have generative world models, which simulates the causes and consequences of things. I don't know. I don't know if that's necessarily true for deep learning, where you have just simply the input to output mappings. I don't know if it would be the world model. Maybe it's kind of like I guess it would be the world model. But I think when people talk about world models in machine learning, they're kind of talking about this thing here, this latter thing. And then this is kind of the thing that results. So, you have like your training data, and then the network represents something, which is this input to output mapping. So it's like, okay, this is the space. If you have these inputs, you get these outputs. And then there's this thing on top that people want to build called a world model, which is kind of generative. So like the things that we were doing in our special issue, that's what they were getting at, is that, if you look at the Hough and Schmidt-Huber paper on world models, they talk about how they have a race car that they teach to kind of understand its universe of scenes in the simulation. And that's their world model. It's generative, but it also, it's kind of like also mapping things to an outcome. So it's a kind of a little bit different way of thinking. But anyways, they make this distinction because in active inference, you're actually actively doing like exploration. You're simulating what the consequences of something are, and you're able to give a bound on that a little bit better. Generalization in deep learning, it's often brittle under distribution, often brittle under distribution shift. So you can only generalize what you have a prior distribution for in deep learning. So if you have data and the data kind of match some other task, then you can make a generalization. If it doesn't, if there has to be some inference made, it's often pretty brittle. It doesn't make that generalization very well. And then in active inference, generalization is potentially more robust by a structured inference and uncertainty modeling. So this is where we have this, the claim is that generalization is improved with this sort of integrated model with experience, with exploration given a prior distribution of beliefs, that sort of thing. I don't know if I buy it. I mean, I'd have to see some sort of test, but yeah. And then biologic plausibility. In deep learning, it's loosely inspired. So if you use a convolutional hierarchy, that's supposedly biologically plausible. But in active inference, we explicitly map things to cortical microcircuits and neuromodulation. Okay, so I don't really want to spend too much more time on this. Let's see if I can get down to maybe some of the latter parts here. So they just basically talk about some of the variational models, and they kind of get into dynamic causal modeling here, which is something that they draw from for their variational Laplace. They talk about learning and adaptation under the free energy principle. They talk about active inference in 2D Pong, which actually is a good, I think, test case because it shows exactly how you can take active inference agents and put them into the world, although that's a pretty basic example. So they implemented a minimal active inference agent to control a paddle in a 2D Pong environment. This is where you have a paddle that moves up and down, and you have to bounce the ball off the paddle. And that's kind of the task. And so this is, again, something that reinforcement learning can do quite well, especially with something like dish brain, where you have your dish brain, which is a cell culture, and then it's using these feedback signals to predict where the ball is and move the paddle. And so they're using an active inference agent for this. Here, in each time step, the agent receives visual observation of the current ball and paddle positions and uses variational Laplace to infer the most likely hidden states of the environment. So those hidden states are things like the ball's velocity at any given time, or maybe how the ball will refract off of your opponent's paddle and make that prediction. So this is a generative model that was hand specified and includes simplified physical dynamics that govern how the ball and paddle evolve over time. So you need to have a set of observation of physical dynamics. You need to have a prior distribution of physical dynamics. In physics, that's easy, but of course you have to have that and you have to have information about all possible hidden states. So if the ball bounces in a weird way, it has to be, you have to be able to predict that interaction and you can do this if you have enough prior, data in your prior distribution, or if you have that experience. But if you don't have that experience, you simply can't do it. And this is, again, kind of contrasting this with training data sets. So, I mean, if you're talking about prior distributions and experience, how does that improve over a training set? Well, I mean, I guess it does if you have a really good prior and really good experience. But if you don't, then it's a little bit of a problem. So this just kind of goes through comparing this with reinforcement learning approaches, which typically learn policies from external reward signals via trial and error. And so that's where, you're just like, you have an agent that's learning things through trying different things. And if it's getting an error, try something else. This agent uses a model-based inference-driven strategy. Its behavior emerges from the minimization of variational and expected free energy, enabling online adaptation and uncertainty-aware decision-making without task-specific supervision or reward shaping. So this is the perception action loop in this table 2. There's an observation model, which is this equation here. It's additive. State inference, which allows you to, this is variational Laplace, which allows you to infer different states of being. Then there's action selection, which has this minimization function. And then your state transition model, which is how do you move from state to state. And that's what you need for that. Okay, so that's kind of contrasting that with reinforcement learning. I kind of glossed over the difference between reinforcement learning doing trial and error and I wouldn't say it's trial and error of the active inference model, but we talked about the mathematical underpinnings already, so you get a sense of how that differs. And then, of course, we're going towards Neuro-Inspired AGI architectures, where we have these key design principles. We have generative models, which maintain internal probabilistic models that generate sensory inputs from latent states. So we have this joint function PXZ. X is latent states, Z is supporting, or X are the sensory inputs, Z is the latent states, and these support simulation, counterfactual reasoning, and belief updating. Then we have this hierarchical structure, so we have our internal representation, which is layered, where the high-level beliefs generate top-down predictions, and low-level sensory data propagate bottom-up prediction errors, like a complex adaptive system. Online variational inference, which is where we use real-time algorithms such as variational Laplace to continually update beliefs in mutee about hidden causes in response to new sensory data. Precision weighting. Then we have this active inference loop, which selects actions AT that minimize expected free energy, the G pi, unifying exploration, which is the epistemic value, and the goal pursuit, which is the instrumental value, in a principled way, which I don't know if that's really true, but yeah. However, planning via expected free energy minimization remains computationally demanding. And then this is the problem where we find out that, yeah, this is really hard to do in an agent's computational abilities. I mean, you don't want to have something that really takes a long time to run in a real-time setting. Then there's continual learning and plasticity, where we adapt the parameters theta of the generative model over time to minimize long-term free energy. Unlike belief updating, this form of structural learning is non-trivial and remains an active research frontier. So they give an example of their Pong game here. You have an observation at time t of the ball. You have your variational Laplace to infer a hidden state. You select an action based on the current belief. You roll out a predicted next state under action AT, and then you move the paddle accordingly in the real world. And that's your sort of your procedure. Okay, so that's that paper. I know Morgan has some comments here.
Well, it's a great summary of the active inference approach to the problems laid out in the biological underpinnings of lifelong learning systems paper. It's covering the same, fragilities, brittleness of conventional deep learning approaches.
Yeah.
And trying, you know, as you see in that kind of table of deep learning versus active inference, like this is a to some degree, this is a bio first approach.
Yeah.
You know, like trying to be a biologically realistic agent, and so, you know, it's kind of covered several times, you know, where this is this doesn't need to be adapted to continual learning or you know, nothing. No, you know, reinforcement modules don't need to be added for action selection and things like that, right? Because it's already got all this, right? And so yeah. And yeah, and of course, you know, final bit, like it's got some decent basic example with 2D Palm.
Oh yeah.
You know, and like you said, this is what Dishbrain, this is what the Braingineers together with Brett Kagan have been doing in terms of goal. What do they call it? Yeah, I think it was goal oriented behavior in brain tissue, right?
Yeah.
So not even an animal. It's just that kind of adaptive tissue response. So yeah, I mean, as I said, I really like him. I've been finding a number of examples where his group comes up or his posts come up. Most recently, so we did the What is Intelligence book for our reading group. This is the Blaze. I always forget his name. Agera Arcus.
Yeah.
Think is yeah. So this is the team leader of Paradigms of Intelligence, a team at Google. This is the team that Blake Richards just joined, and there's a lot in it. You know, it's got a very wide scope, and the first chapter he spun off as a separate book, which is called What is Life, where it summarizes the kind of computational life, his computational life paper from 2020 to 2023. I've got it here somewhere. But if you remember, you know, he likes talking about this because he gets to say brain fuck.
Yeah.
And the, you know, which is particularly funny because it's like, you know, if you know the story of brain fuck, it's like a grad student's attempt to to mess with you.
Yeah.
As a cruel joke, but you know, it's an interesting. I mean, I think it would be great to do a deep dive on that particular paper because it's super key to his push to see symbiogenesis as a key mechanism for his computational life, computational intelligence, as somewhat being synonymous. I mean, life and intelligence, and,
Yeah.
you know, in a kind of, you know, Levinish way. The start just needing that self-replication, right? Anyway, I'm not. Oh yeah. So this, but the reason I bring it up in terms of this context is that two things. So one, we got talking about this, like he wanted to say, the other way I was summarizing this book was saying, like, this is the longest introduction to active inference that you can imagine, because it's someone who's saying that once he's got a very 11 single cells need to model their environment, and that becomes a loop that you kind of tighten to reach anticipation, but that once you realize that your environment has agents that are like you, that are modeling their environment and potentially that this sparks an arms race of anticipatory systems that he wants to credit with a lot of growth and intelligence, and likes to put this in a Cambrian what do they call it? The Cambrian explosion? No.
Yeah.
Is it? Okay. Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And that this particular this modeling of agents in your environment, he wants to say, it has as a second repercussion. So one, it prepares you for war. Two, it prepares you for social groupings, or
Okay.
cooperation. Let's call it cooperation, persuasion,
Right.
or coercion.
Yeah.
And the one point we're doing it as two-parter, so this is only getting halfway through the book, but he talks about octopuses, because the problem with this theory, and I was thinking a lot about your cross-species examples from your talk, Bradley, and how useful that can be, and kind of what would you think of this particular oddity, which is, of course, that octopuses, they're smart, they can model other agents, but they're not social.
Right.
And so I'm going back and forth on what to think about that, how to put that in context, but it's funny because while I was reading that, Alexander Shaw talked about a paper that he's writing on soft body mechanics, soft body control in octopuses, and active inference. So we've got that which apparently hasn't hit arXiv yet.
Yeah.
Or I would share a link. All I can find is his LinkedIn post on this. But I think that is interesting. There's also a lab at Berkeley. I think it's the Dole lab, spelled the Turkish way, so there's some weird mark over the U. And they've got one species of octopus that's kind of social. And we think we should study them. And so I'm curious what you think on that. The other funny aside on the Dole Lab is that they've been giving psychedelics to these octopuses. and there's this long history of giving psychedelics to animals,
Yeah.
So like, I don't know if you remember the Scientific American had this. This was obviously a paper first, right? But like giving spiders LSD, which just it's like I guess I get why this gets through IRB, but how do you really justify this?
There was a point in the 50s and 60s where they just gave every LSD to everything.
Exactly. It was in the water, so to speak. Yeah. And of course the funny result is that it is tough. It is tough. So as an undergrad, Vidhi, I built as an undergrad, I built operant chambers for crabs and crayfish, and of course they're underwater. So this makes it really hard because you can't just drop a pellet in there and be like, there you go. If it's in water, it potentially floats away.
Yeah.
Or we had to come up with some things. Yeah, I give Vidhi some time here, but interesting topics that are relevant. Like the What is Intelligence paper or book is definitely trying to collect. It's trying to marshal a lot of different threads, but that really come together in, again, it's like, is it correct to say precedence bias, where it's just like because I was introduced to active inference first, it's like all I see in What is Intelligence is like building up to this kind of active inference story.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was also nice that like the paper we did before this was the biological underpinnings of lifelong learning system, because that was like, that's like a perfect precursor paper or preceding paper to this as well. And this is a really nice overview of all that, of kind of this material. So
yeah, to Vidhi's point, she said, but I wonder how we can study animals underwater, like ant colonies, particle swarms, etc. All these algorithms have been studied because they are on land. Yeah, this is interesting because the way we uses, we'll have computational models like swarm intelligence algorithms and things like that, and that's really based on the idealized behavior. So that is we observe them in certain ways in the lab, we characterize the behavior, and then we say this is the algorithm that they use, and then of course we're looking at idealized behavior. So it could be in different environments they use variations on this, or like with ant colonies, you're using this principle where you have ants, they lay down their pheromone, ants follow the pheromone, and then they build these networks. And we assume that they're optimal, or there's some optimality criterion, which is why we're interested in it. But it could, there are cases where they just build structures, and those structures have some sort of complexity. In DevoWorm a couple weeks ago, I did a paper on, this is in the recording, not in the main meeting, but it was a paper on building these wasp nests or wasp colonies where they have these chambers that have like levels and then ramps, and they have to figure out how to do that amongst the individuals. And like it turns out that like the nests aren't all the same. There's a lot of variation, but because they're interacting, that those interactions are basically constraining the architectures that can be used. So they have the same architecture, but there's a lot of variation in the architecture. And then of course, if you have different types of materials available to the wasps, they build different types. They may or may not be able to build that, or use that same architecture. And the model that they used in this was, well, they observed like some extant wasp nests, and then they built a computational model that involved resource availability and then environment, like the physical environment, and then the behavior, and that constrained the behavior. So if you constrained it by putting it in a moist environment where the mud was like really moist versus really hard packed, you get different architectures there. But that's the kind of what we're looking at there, is almost kind of like the emergent properties. That's what people are interested in, not the kind of the exact behavior, which is interesting because in the world of algorithms, we're kind of interested in the exact behaviors, but we're also estimating a lot too. So would you like
Well,
to
I was just
present?
going to say that just to finish that one thing, that they're giving Dolan's lab is giving psychedelics to these octopuses to improve their sociality, or or at least that's the theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so Vidhi,
Right. Hi, how are you?
how are you?
So it's not a very formal presentation. I just have a report, even that's not formatted well. And yeah, so our problem was the Amazon post that recommendation. And like we know that there are a lot of first-time users, and Amazon suggests some things. They have their own algorithm, of course, but we have chosen the Amazon data set, like the Amazon reviews data set. That's how the term Amazon cold start came in. And this whole problem is called as cold start. So that's what we tried to do. Like we tried to create a model that could recommend, like not exactly, but it was a model that could tell us how accurate predictions can be. So we have used fast light GCN for this, and fast light GCN and GCN is basically nothing but graph convolutional networks. So yeah, I've just explained, like we made this report because it was a group project, and like we made this report and we tried to explain pretty much what our problem was. So the whole motivation of it is to recommend systems that are crucial for e-commerce platforms like Amazon, etc. And as I mentioned previously, we named it Amazon because our data set is Amazon. I can show you the data set. Right. So I'll just quickly run through it. We thought that even cold start has multiple different types of cold start, like the strict cold start, long tail cold start, or sparse data set cold start. What we did is we thought that if a user has had interactions equal to 2, we can like interactions less than or equal to 2. So even that user is actually new because they have just ordered one product. So if there's a home page, then what should be suggested to that user? So we took K as the interactions and we specifically kept it as less than or equal to 2. And we divided this whole thing into 2 phases. The first phase was the general recommendation system using the graph neural networks. And the second one was to focus on the users with less than or equal to 2 interactions. So as I mentioned earlier, we have this fast light GCN model. And before we started anything, we created a graph, which is a bipartite graph system. And there were user nodes and item nodes. So user nodes were for the customers and item nodes were for the products. So these are the two graphs that we made, and then both of them were connected by using the mapping. Which user has ordered which products, we mapped them, and these edges were created between the nodes based on the rating that was there. So I think I should just show you the data set. The data set is here. Like, it's pretty big, but mostly we have used the user ID, product ID, and profile and helpfulness did not help us much. We used the score to make the edges of the graph and the text reviews to help us a bit more. So, alright, I'll just quickly run through it. So we chose light GCN over other models because it has those feature transformations and nonlinear activations. Also, it was faster and simpler, and we did not have much time to implement this. So we chose a very smaller, like an easier model that could do a lot in less time. And the main thing is that it has a graph and it does not involve weight, so it can just learn from the nearby nodes. So we showed that. And yeah, so why we chose fast light GCN is because in normal standard light GCN, we have only one positive item and one negative item, and it uses the BPR loss. Whereas the fast light GCN, we can actually have one positive and three negative items. So yeah, this is the fast light GCN, like the approach that we use. And yeah, so the contrastive loss is nothing but one positive and many negatives together. And also the main thing of what contrastive loss means is that it can group the similar items together, and it also groups the unsimilar items together. So when we create this model and the user is suggesting something, like when something is suggested to the user, we also know what is to not get posted. We also know what is not supposed to get recommended to the user. So even if there's something random happening, we can avoid the negatives in that. And then we use the cosine annealing learning rate. So it's as simple as understanding how vector dot products work. That if we multiply two vectors like the product ID and the user ID, and if we get some cos theta, for example, if it's 0, that means they're in the same direction. And since they're in the same direction, that means they are alike. If the angle is 90 degrees, if they're perpendicular, that means they're not very alike, but it's not negative. And if it's like completely opposite 180 degrees, then it's opposite, right? Like two opposite directions. That's not supposed to be suggested. And then we had, just a few more equations, and then we changed it for 200 epochs. So our graph had 3 layers because that was the optimal thing that we found in other papers. And yeah, this is just explaining about how the layers are. Like layer 1 is the layer 0 is the initial layer, and then the 3 layers and how it works. So before we tried light GCN, we also thought that we can use a simple model like logistic regression. But like we were wrong over there because logistic regression failed, and logistic regression is usually for like binary things like yes or no, should this be suggested, should this not be suggested. But our problem was more complex and we wanted to suggest better things to the users. So yeah, this is just the math part of it, of what we used. And this is the node degrees to popular nodes so that they don't dominate. And yeah, I guess I'll go a bit faster. So we had 120 epochs, as I said, and in each of those epochs, we had like 4096 random batches, or like a batch of 4096 interactions or pairs of user and the positive item. And yeah, repeat 3 times is because of the 3 layers, and again, the cosine annealing that we used. So we had that. And then, of course, before everything, we had to work with the data to understand what it is. So there were total of like 256,000 users and these many items, 24,000 items. And these were the total interactions between them. That means like roughly most of them had around 2 interactions. And then this is what the graph talks about, that if these are the number of interactions per user and these are the users, then the k that we chose as 2 is quite optimal because k equal to 2 will come somewhere around this red line. And yeah, most of the users have had around 2 interactions. So this data set is good for a cold start problem basically, and it's a long tail distribution. So yeah, this is just about this graph and the cold start cutoff, which we kept as 2 later on, like when we focused it only to 2 users. And then this is the processing pipeline again, that originally there were these many interactions, that means these many users and these many items. So again, it talks about the same thing. And after filtering, we had 35% reduction in the interactions because k is equal to 2. So now we have focused everything to 2. And then we had the implementation. So these are nothing but the model parameters. The embedded dimensions are 128. That means there are 128 traits. For example, a user has bought a book. So now based on that book, we can have 128 traits. Like, okay, this book is maybe in a scientific context, so it's more technological something. Or maybe the user likes buying only books. So like that, we had those embedded dimensions. Then layers and the learning rate, 120 epochs. And yeah, dropout is most important to ensure that there's no overfitting happening. Otherwise, if the model is overfitting, then there's no point of it. So again, this was how we did our prediction. And then, yeah, so to evaluate our model, we kept a hit ratio and hit rate. And hit rate is nothing but how many times the proportion of the users for whom at least one relevant item appears in the top K recommendations. So here, K is not the interactions, but K is the number of users with at least one hit. Like, K is the number of items that are displayed, like first 5 items or first 10 items. And then we had the NDCG as well, which is not very important because we work mainly with the hit ratio to know how many times the correct thing is being recommended in the top K product. And then, yeah, so this was the evaluation. Then our results, of course, so the loss was reducing over the epochs, and we had 120 epochs. And yeah, this is what we got. HR at K is equal to 5 is 51%. That means when there are 5 products, the recommendation is correct by 51%. And if there are 10 products, then the recommendation is correct by 53%. So as K increases, that means the number of items that are being recommended, even the hit ratio is increasing. So yeah, that's the graph of hit ratio, that the hit ratio keeps increasing and it goes to 59%, which is almost 60%. So that's a good rate. And these are the items embeddings visualization. So since we cannot have 128 dimensions that we can show in a graph, we had only dim1 and dim2, where the 128 embeddings are divided, not equally, but in some mathematical way. And then this graph is actually all these nodes are the items, and the ones that are very close clustered are the ones that are related to each other. The ones that are far are like, the distance is based on how related the items are to each other. So that was about that. And yeah, we just created a model and had the hit ratio definition for it, so that it can talk about what is the accuracy of the model. We didn't have much time, so we couldn't implement the actual part where we could have some recommendations going on because we would need another data set for that. But this is how a model works. And yeah, these are some of the outputs. I think I showed this as well. These are again just the outputs. So we had some design challenges. We haven't included the part where we tested it on logistic regression and it didn't work out. We just included the standard light GCN and the PPR loss. So BPR is actually Bayesian probability. And even though it is based on a preference, like how the Bayesian law works, it didn't work well because over here, this is like a very low model. Like, it has lesser capacity and it has a very weak training thing happening. So with one positive, it can take only one negative. That's why it was also overfitting, because it knew that only this pair exists. But then the contrastive laws that we use could actually map one positive with 3 negatives. So that helped us a lot. And yeah, we can just see again the training over the epochs. And then we had another hybrid content GNN graph neural network where we only included the positive interactions. That's why what happened is that we got the hit ratio as 1, which is 100%, and that's why the model was overfitting. So we have explained why we chose those hyperparameters, where we chose 3 layers as it worked out to give the best balance between HR and the NDCG. And yeah, that's it. There's nothing.
All right. Well, that's great. So this was part of a class or a program project, or what was this?
So it's like we have a course, machine learning. That's a theory course. And then our faculty actually wanted us to implement something. Like she was like, just learning algorithms is not a good thing. We should probably try to think of a model or use something that is already existing. Or not already existing, but we should try to explore something and try to implement it so that our learning can improve. So that's how we thought of using this.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That looks good. Any questions for Vidhi? Yeah, it was great work. Yeah. There we go. It's Jesse.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Vidhi. And congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you.
All that good work.
Yeah.
All right. Jesse, did you want to give an update?
I'll say a few things.
Okay.
I forgot what I said last week about plot twisters in depth, but their playtesting session has gone well, and they're continuing to do more of that. This week, they postponed one of their sessions to reorient it to get a bit more one-to-one feedback. That's sort of interesting when you're trying to do a playtesting session, but you make a group of people operate as if they're one person in a going through a procedure, kind of wrapping some things up with data and direction folks in Joe Pro. Like we're kind of getting to a stopping point for the semester, and I think that's good. Like many of the people have been working kind of continuously on it, and it's like, okay, we need to get to the part of the year where it's like both people are gonna. If you don't do something very intentionally, then it's just gonna drift away.
So I'm very aware of that, and I'm attempting to facilitate that happening, and at the same time, like building up some momentum for other things I want to do in the year ahead. It's very it's very hard in the sense that it's already basically Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving is already basically the end of the year. So it's like I always find this to be a challenging time of the year when arranging everybody else's stuff, because it's just it goes so fast, and it's like being on a slide. Like you don't have a lot of lateral movement. It's all just going. So that's kind of high level stuff. Next week, I don't know if I can easily pull this up. Let me try. Let me try to get something. Next week, I might want to take a deeper dive into a specific paper, and I don't know if I can easily pull it off. Okay, let me try this. I might just loosely preview the paper, but it's a very interesting paper on a number of fronts, because it deals with many subjects of interest. Yeah, I've got the paper here now, and I'll only spend a couple minutes on this just to tease it. Yeah, it's called Reflective Agency ethical and empirical framework for AI-mediated self-reflection systems. And this is out of MIT Media Lab, Rosenbig Card, Patty Mays. So it's Minsel Kim, the lead author, is in Fluid Interfaces, I believe. And what's interesting about this paper is that it's sort of it creates a framework. It offers a little bit of a investigatory case study of among existing AI journal chatbot type things, and then also has a sort of a small user study too. And what they look at is, I don't have my highlights on this version, but that's okay. But what's quite interesting, and what we can talk more about next time, is they ground their analysis in philosophy and phenomenology. So they talk about, they get at Aristotelian virtue ethics as some other philosophical grounding, but phenomenology in terms of Ide and Heidegger. Am I saying that right? Ide? I don't know. Uh, with Heidegger and some other stuff that we've kind of gotten around to, and um, I appreciate this sort of phenomenologically grounded take on human computer interaction, but also like how things are designed to constrain or maintain space for reflective agency or curiosity, or things like how you're designing something as a means by which you're tipping the scales on comprehension or determination of narrative or what things mean. And I think it's a very interesting blend of like actual useful phenomenology, and then the AI stuff, and then language and comprehension, subcognition futures type things. It's very and also, like, the last thing I'll say is, like, the paper also, it kind of it kind of um suggests like you should have an important amount of friction to slow things down, as opposed to just a conclusion and then how you should feel about that conclusion, or how you should feel about your particular experience or perspective as just automated and kind of, well, here's the answer, and that very sort of classic GTP, like, well, here's the conclusion, and kind of, maybe alluding to some nuance, but not really participating fully in the creation of it at best, versus, passively or steering or indoctrinating you to a very nice viewpoint, or a cadence of interaction that is beneficial to people who want you to use the app, as opposed to actually exploring what your situation might be. So I will conclude by saying the paper, in one sense, I think is a complete justification for why plot twisters exist, because in essence, plot twisters is, you know, our existing use of AI is, mm, I don't even know how to say or comment on it, but let's say it is not yet. We are investigating possibilities and do not reach a full conclusion yet, I think is fair to say, about what kind and how to use AI and modern AI within plot twisters. I can say that much. But in spite of that, or regardless, or like unrelated to that specifically, plot twisters is inherently formed around the idea of what they're calling reflective agency, or being able to be aware of and have a sense of your own narrative. And what does that look like, and how is that modeled for people to engage in the game world? So I'll leave it at that. But I think it's a very interesting paper in terms of both like some research. Like, I think I might reach out to the lead author, and kind of have them talk to me, or maybe talk to plot twisters, or do something that's open to like our general community, because a lot of people in our community, and by that I mean like orthogonal and JoePro and maybe Flat Twisters and maybe Ecolopto and maybe some other people in this space, both at larger too, like in terms of game development around this stuff. And Amanda Curtis is like doing a lot with that and part of leading up the MetaGov stuff and the playtesting. And also just Boston, like this is a very Boston based thing, like that these folks are looking at. So I look forward to following up with that. And maybe we can do a deeper dive next time, or I can do a better summary next time, because I'm writing up some things about it too. I think it'd be a nice bridge in a way that I'd like to see more of. So yeah, that's what that paper is, and then I'll leave it at that. There's a few other things, but we can say more next time. If I think we're meeting next week, or is that the week of Thanksgiving? We're not going to meet then. I forget.
Thank you for that presentation.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let me know. But either I'll make a record or write something about it either way, because I think it's one of those. It's something that I'll be citing a lot of. I think the framework to developing will be relevant to a lot of things in plot twisters, and then maybe some other things too.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. Yeah, Morgan, did you have something to say, or?
No, certain children have awoken.
Okay.
And
yeah,
are making it's good. But I did kind of miss the last bit there.
okay.
Although I think I'm down for a meeting on next Saturday too.
Yeah.
I'm certainly hoping to connect with some Hopkins people.
Okay.
I'll be in Baltimore.
Okay.
That's where we do holidays.
Yeah.
Because we can fit 20, 25 people in one place.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you. So I think I want to go over two other papers to finish off, and these are kind of like I'm not going to get deeply into each of these, but these are things that were brought up in the Slack or before, so I wanted to kind of go over them and address them. So this is a Google DeepMind paper. This is AlphaEvolve. So I can't remember where this came up. Maybe one of our discussions or in the Slack. So this is AlphaEvolve, coding agent for scientific and algorithmic discovery. So they're doing this sort of AI scientist type of thing. This is their white paper on it. So in this white paper, we present AlphaEvolve, an evolutionary coding agent that substantially enhances capabilities of state-of-the-art large language models on highly challenging tasks, such as tackling open scientific problems or optimizing critical pieces of computational infrastructure. AlphaEvolve orchestrates an autonomous pipeline of large language models whose task is to improve an algorithm by making direct changes to the code. Using an evolutionary approach, continuously receiving feedback from one or more evaluators, AlphaEvolve iteratively improves the algorithm, potentially leading to new scientific and practical discoveries. We demonstrate the broad applicability of this approach by applying it to a number of important computational problems. When applied to optimizing critical components of large-scale computational stacks at Google, AlphaEvolve developed a more efficient scheduling algorithm for data centers, on a functionally equivalent simplification in the circuit design of hardware accelerators, and accelerated the training of large language models underpinning AlphaEvolve itself. Furthermore, AlphaEvolve discovered novel, provably correct algorithms that surpass state-of-the-art solutions on a spectrum of problems in mathematics and computer science, significantly expanding the scope of prior automated discovery methods. And this is a citation here, Romero Paredes et al. 2023. Notably, AlphaEvolve developed a search algorithm that found a procedure to multiply two 4x4 complex valued matrices using 48 scalar multiplications, offering the first improvement after 56 years over Strassen's algorithm in this setting. We believe AlphaEvolve and coding agents like it can have a significant impact in improving solutions to problems across many areas of science and computation. So this Romero Paredes et al. Paper. So this is the Nature paper, Mathematical Discoveries from Program Search with Large Language Models. And this is their kind of approach to this. Large language models have demonstrated tremendous capabilities in solving complex tasks, from quantitative reasoning to understanding natural language. However, large language models sometimes suffers from confabulations or hallucinations, which can result in them making plausible but incorrect statements. This hinders the use of current large models in scientific discovery. Here we introduce fun search for searching the function space, not that they're actually fun. And this is an evolutionary procedure based on pairing a pre-trained large language model with a systematic evaluator. We demonstrate the effectiveness of this approach to surpass the best known results in important problems, pushing the boundary of existing large language model-based approaches. Applying fun search to a central problem and external combinatorics, the capset problem, we discover new constructions of large capsets going beyond the best known ones, both in finite dimensional and asymptotic cases. This shows that it is possible to make discoveries for established open problems using large language models. We showcase the generality of fun search by applying it to an algorithmic problem, online bin packing, finding new heuristics that improve upon widely used baselines. In contrast to most computer search approaches, fun search searches for programs that describe how to solve a problem rather than what the solution is. Beyond being an effective and scalable strategy, discovered programs tend to be more interpretable than raw solutions, enabling feedback loops between domain experts and the fun search agent, and then deploying such programs in real-world applications. So this is the paper here. And this just kind of describes the fun search agent and how they did this. So back to this paper here. So they actually compare fun search and AlphaEvolve in table 1. This is the fun search is their previous agent, AlphaEvolve is their new agent. So fun search does something and then AlphaEvolve, so I guess, improves upon it in some way. So fun search evolves single functions. AlphaEvolve evolves entire code files. Fun search evolves up to 10 to 20 lines of code. AlphaEvolve evolves up to hundreds of lines of code. Fun search evolves code in Python. AlphaCode evolves any language. Fun search needs fast evaluation, around less than 20 minutes on one CPU. AlphaEvolve can evaluate for hours in parallel on accelerated GPUs. Fun search allows for millions of large language model samples to be used. In AlphaEvolve, only thousands of large language model samples can suffice. Fun search uses small large language models. There's no benefit from the larger models. AlphaEvolve benefits from the state-of-the-art large language models. Fun search uses minimal context, which draws from only previous solutions. AlphaEvolve draws from rich context and feedback and prompts. And then finally, fun search optimizes single metrics, whereas AlphaEvolve can simultaneously optimize multiple metrics. Okay, so that's, and then this is the high-level overview of AlphaEvolve. So remember, AlphaEvolve is sort of an improvement upon their previous attempt at this. In this case, what we're doing here is we have this feedback between humans and the agent. Humans define what. The human set evaluation criterion provides initial solutions and optional background knowledge. They provide a problem definition to the agent AlphaEvolve, which figures out how. And then there's this prompt sampler, and the prompt sampler gives rich content containing past trials and ideas to a large language model ensemble. That ensemble is a proposal of improved programs that goes to the evaluators pool, and then that enables programs with quality scores and other feedback, which goes to the program database. And then those are programs that improve and act as inspiration, and that goes then back to the prompt sampler, which then provides an improved solution to the human. So this is interesting. They use an evolutionary algorithm in this orchestrating procedure. And that evolutionary algorithm gradually develops programs that improves the score on the automated evaluation metrics associated with the task. Actually, why don't we go through creative generation? So they use this creative generation. So to drive the evolutionary procedure, AlphaEvolve leverages the capabilities of state-of-the-art large language models. His principal role is to digest information about previously developed solutions and to propose new and diverse ways of improving the solutions. Although AlphaEvolve is model agnostic, in ablations we observe that AlphaEvolve performs increasingly better as the underlying large language model improves. So this is kind of their code here. This is just showing kind of the blocks here that they're using. And just kind of thinking about this and how this is implemented. Okay, so this figure 3 is an illustrative example of applying AlphaEvolve to evolving a supervised learning pipeline. All snippets of code are abbreviated with ellipses, which you can see here on the, so these are just the different code snippets that they're demonstrating, indicating skipped lines. The user provided file with blocks marked for evolution and a special evaluate function that can be evoked to score the current version of the code. Example of an assembled prompt can be provided to the large language model. Example output generated by the large language model in C. So this is A here. This is what is provided by the user. So this code here is provided by the user. This code in B is an example of the assembled prompt, which will be provided to the large language model. So you have the prompt here. So it looks like what we're doing here is we're sort of annotating this and providing more detail. And then C is where you have an output generated by the large language model. So the models that they use, AlphaEvolve employs an ensemble of large language models. Specifically, we use a combination of Gemini 2.0 Flash and Gemini 2.0 Pro. This ensemble approach allows us to balance computational throughput with the quality of generated solutions. Gemini 2.0 Flash, with its lower latency, enables a higher rate of candidate generation, increasing the number of ideas explored per unit time. Gemini 2.0 Pro, possessing greater capabilities, provides occasional higher quality suggestions that can significantly advance the evolutionary search and potentially lead to breakthroughs. This strategy mix optimizes the overall discovery process by maximizing the volume of evaluated ideas while retaining the potential for substantial improvements by the more powerful model. Okay, so they actually get into their evolutionary methods here. AlphaEvolve extends a long tradition of research on evolutionary or genetic programming. Will run repeatedly uses a set of mutation and crossover operators to evolve a pool of programs. In particular, classical evolutionary techniques have succeeded in symbolic regression applications, automated scientific or algorithmic discovery, and scheduling problems. Now, the challenge with evolutionary methods is the use of handwritten evolution operators, which can be hard to design and may fail to capture important properties of the domain. In contrast, AlphaEvolve uses large language models to automate the construction of these operators. It leverages the large language model's world knowledge to mutate programs without the need to predefine a set of allowed mutation operators. So it actually mutates things using the world knowledge of the large language model, and it doesn't use mutation operators as usually would in an evolutionary algorithm. So this is so the fun search system is so fun search, which was the precursor to this model, they focused on Bayesian optimization, and in AlphaEvolve they're using this sort of evolutionary approach. The second paper I wanted to talk about. Okay, so the second paper I wanted to talk about here. So did you have something you wanted to comment on, Morgan?
Just the tradition that this is coming from, like, yeah, it kind of goes back to wanting to dive into Blaze's paper on computational life, because it's like these are kind of old ideas, I noticed that Jean-Baptiste Moret was wrote the summary article to the AlphaEvolve.
Oh, okay.
and this is this is an old a veteran of Gecko and those kinds of conferences.
Yeah.
I'm blanking on his particular technique, but I was thinking about it again with regard to what is intelligence, because he makes the claim in the end of book 4. He's trying to talk about like a computational intelligence symbiosis.
Yeah.
and I think what he's trying to get at, or certainly part of this, is that how do you optimize? How do you deal with multiple objectives? And and again, this is much more real world.
Yeah.
And again, has this kind of tradition at Gecko for how do we make the most abstract multi-objective problem and do so just noticing it's lovely to see this, but it's also interesting that it's such an old an extension of old ideas. I love math as a training ground, but math is also in a sense math is the toy problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's this very specific problem set.
Super specific, super. Yeah. It's very easy to extract or focus on kind of one dimension at a time.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean, yeah. But it's cool. It's cool to see.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jesse had to leave, and I'll finish up here with this last paper I wanted to talk about. I think we talked about this maybe in a previous discussion where it came up in the Slack. But this is actually, I see Ewan Berndt is on this paper. This is learning the natural history of human disease with generative transformers. So this is very much sort of a bioinformatics type thing where they're using transformers to look at human disease discovery, basically. And of course, we talked about the post-transformer model possibilities. So, this is a nice summary of sort of how you can use transformers in this bioinformatic domain. And so, that's another place where we can use transformers to look at how well we can do, and then think about other types of models that we might use to get similar results or better results. So this, I'll just go through the abstract here. So decision making in healthcare relies on understanding patients' past and current health states to predict and ultimately change their future course. Artificial intelligence methods promises to aid this task by learning patterns of disease progression from large amounts of data. However, their potential have not been fully investigated at scale. So they modify what they call a generative pre-trained transformer, and they abbreviate that GPT. So it's kind of confusing architecture to model the progression and competing nature of human diseases. We train this model, Delphi 2M, on data from 400,000 UK biobank participants and validate it using external data from 1.9 million Danish individuals with no change in parameters. Delta 2M predicts the rates of more than 1,000 diseases, conditional on each individual's past disease history, with accuracy comparable to that of existing single disease models. Delphi 2M's generative nature also enables sampling of synthetic future health trajectories, providing meaningful estimates of potential disease burden for up to 20 years, and enabling the training of AI models that have never seen actual data. Explainable AI methods provides insights into Delphi's 2M's predictions, revealing clusters of comorbidities within and across disease chapters and their time-dependent consequence on future health, but also highlight biases learned from training data. In summary, transformer-based models appear to be well suited for predictive and generative health-related tasks and are applicable to population-scale datasets and provide insights into temporal dependencies between disease events, potentially improving the understanding of personalized health risks and informing precision medicine approaches. So a couple words on this. First of all, we talked about looking at what presumably are transformers versus active inference methods. And we see here that transformer models, at least in this context, can do this kind of predictive and generative work on looking at a data set and predicting things from that data set. But the context here is healthcare data, so it is what it is. It's not a task like exploring a world where you have a lot of unknown aspects to it. But the other thing I wanted to point out was that in this case, we're using a transformer to provide insights into temporal dependencies between disease events. So we're looking at these sequences. Of course, in large language models, they have sequences of tokens and putting those tokens together in a meaningful way. In this case, what the transformer is doing is pulling together these temporal dependencies in a predictive way that allows us to determine states. So we have these disease events. We don't know necessarily which ones cause other things or which ones go together, and we can do that with transformer. So we can highlight these temporal dependencies in these sequences. So this is kind of an interesting way to do this, and it kind of frames this idea of the post transformer landscape, because what is it that transformers do well? In this case, we see that they can give us these predictive models. They do have these sort of generative properties, They can deal with temporal data well. They can put together sequences of events or sequences of things. And then, of course, we might compare that with something like an active inference model, where you're requiring some sort of exploration of an environment. And then on top of that, we have these world models that we can employ. So if we employ a world model to something like this, then what is the added value to that? And then maybe what is the added value to using an active inference model in this case?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not too familiar with the kind of data set that would be, but another big part of what is intelligence is him saying that he was basically coming from developing autocomplete and so certainly someone who sees great power in the transformer model, or finding prediction as a fundamental fundamental feature of agency,
Yeah.
and now how that perhaps applies in this case, and I'm open to see. I'm still not quite sure what goes into those. The one thing I wanted to mention though was that what we're hoping to start at the tower, together with some UCSF people. Well, we had a great meeting. Actually, the wetware meeting. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry, somebody decided to start practicing violin.
Oh.
It's this model from the ARC Institute called State, and this is also a prediction model. So I like it. I mean, we're in a bio lab. Virtual cells are all the rage right now. All the billionaires with intellectual aspirations are building virtual cell models and or funding virtual cell models, and so we're going to be doing a deep dive on that particular model, and as well as hopefully make this into a ongoing project, in the sense that new data sets, new perturbation data sets are being released all the time, and kind of covering what's going into them to be able to make these partly these general agency kind of models, cellular models, partly these drug response models, right? And of course, that's where I expect that there will be kind of this is one of the reasons why there will be plenty of money to collect data sets for this.
Yeah.
Is that drug development still is a massive driver of the research and development in these areas, and as we see with sorry, okay, there. Anyway, we can follow up on that. I mean, but I think it would be I think it's really interesting to deep dive on a transformer model that's being applied to data that we better understand, or kind of like, I don't want to say better. I mean, like, I've got better mechanistic models of what's going on, and what I really want to connect this to is the Levin regulatory, what's he call it? Regulatory network machine.
Okay. Yeah.
I think it's yeah. So harness, yeah. So he's talking about it with regard to, you know, this kind of analog computing, you know, but I think this actually gets at kind of Blaze's point about computation being being fundamental, is that you actually see this in this is a part of single cell genetic regulatory networks.
Yeah.
And you know that it's quite easy to see. Yeah, just I think we can connect it, or I like what he was doing in terms of somewhat trying to add to artificial life simulations with a slightly more CS approach, which he had there. But I think we, you know, like yeah, it would be great to find a domain in which there's, you know, sort of like that paper you just covered, where it's just like, you know, global health data. Like that's an awesome topic to kind of look at. That's kind of far from where I'm at in terms of data sets, and you know, I think if we focus on these virtual cells, I think there's a lot that we can cover that will stay very, you know, you know, kind of Devo worm relevant.
Yeah.
So to speak. I mean, you know, Devo worm, and then what I want to call like, or like what Brett Kagan calls bioengineered intelligence. You know. Right. Because that's the area where I'm trying to, you know, find new ways to extend these, like, you know, like the 2D Pong.
Yeah.
like can we do better than that? But like, you know, by that I mean around growing the neuronal tissue as well as the complexity of those structures and networks and things like that. Anyway.
Yeah. All right, that sounds great. Yeah, let's follow up on that. Definitely, and you know, in the new year, you know, we're always trying to sort of put thematic, you know, build thematic themes to get research out in Devo worms. So that's probably going to be one of our themes then.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious as well. Just sorry, one last thing. Foresight Institute, released videos that I can share. You know, like it's from their Neurotech weekend, and it's got more details from Conrad Gording, Ed Boynton's worm project, for lack of a better. I forget. Maybe they gave it a name. I forget.
Yeah,
anyway. But you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
Like, you know, like super relevant. Although, you know, like what they're missing is the Levin part, right? Which
Yeah.
is the development.
Well, yeah.
And just one last thing, like no surprise to me at all that Blaze is publishing papers with Michael Levin.
Oh yeah, probably.
Yeah. But I think those would be interesting to cover too. Anyway.
Yeah, that's great. All right, let's call it a day, and thanks for attending all the discussion. See you next week.
Sounds good. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.